The rhythmic hum of a sewing machine cuts through the silence of a shuttered Paris workshop. Thread glides, needles bite into fabric, and the faint scent of oil and starch fills the air. Outside, a German lorry grinds past, its wheels echoing against the cobblestones, while the red and black flags of the Reich hang limp in the morning haze. At a corner table, a woman bends low over a uniform jacket. Her movements are precise, almost reverent. But this is no ordinary seamstress at work. Hidden beneath the lining, stitched in fine silk, is a thread of invisible ink, a message written in code meant for London. Every fold, every stitch, is a risk. Discovery means arrest, interrogation, or worse. Yet she continues, calm, composed, her face expressionless under the gray light. Her name is Claudine Moreau, once a dressmaker, now a courier for the British Special Operations Executive, the secret organization Churchill called the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. In her hands, beauty had become a weapon, and through her needlework, Britain's invisible war was being fought, one stitch at a time. By 1943, Europe was a continent in chains. From the Atlantic coast to the Carpathian Mountains, Nazi occupation had tightened its grip across nations. France, once a proud republic, lay divided. The German-controlled north and Vichy in the south, a puppet regime wrapped in the rhetoric of collaboration. But beneath the veneer of obedience, a different France stirred. The Resistance, a scattered, fragile network of men and women, began to move in whispers. They were teachers, farmers, priests, and tailors, railway workers and couriers, people who risked everything to pass a name, a number, a single page. Every gesture of defiance, no matter how small, was a step toward liberation. Amid this shadow war, Britain had become the nerve center of European resistance. In Baker Street, London, behind unmarked doors, the Special Operations Executive, SOE, directed an invisible army. Established in July 1940 by Churchill himself, its mission was stark and unambiguous. Set Europe ablaze. The SOE trained agents in sabotage, espionage, and subversion, disciplines that lived outside the formalities of conventional warfare. Yet not all weapons were guns or explosives. In many cases, the most effective tools were ordinary: radios, bicycles, typewriters, and needles. For the British, occupied France represented both opportunity and peril. The country's industrial workshops, seamstress ateliers, and tailoring cooperatives were ideal cover for intelligence work. Tailors moved freely between German officers and local civilians. Their shops offered quiet spaces where codes could be hidden, documents passed, and faces forgotten in a crowd. It was within this delicate world that Claudine Moreau emerged. A seamstress from Rouen, she had trained before the war in haute couture, fine stitching, pattern cutting, precision detailing. Her talent had earned her a modest reputation among local dressmakers. But when her husband, a railway engineer, was deported to work in a German labor camp, her quiet trade became her disguise. Through underground contacts linked to the French resistance network Prosper, Claudine was introduced to an SOE agent working under the code name Arnaud. The British saw immediate potential. Her workshop offered privacy, mobility, and a flow of materials, all perfect conditions for covert communication. Soon she was carrying messages sewn into seams, microfilms wrapped inside reels of thread, and silk patches marked with hidden cipher patterns. Her deliveries, disguised as clothing commissions, traveled by courier from Normandy to Lyon, and from there to neutral Switzerland or across the Channel by airdrop. Each journey carried immense risk. The Gestapo had grown increasingly efficient by 1943, intercepting networks, executing spies, and breaking codes. Yet the simplicity of Claudine's method made it nearly undetectable. A uniform could pass through checkpoints without suspicion. A dress order might conceal the location of an Allied drop zone. The British command, though cautious, relied heavily on such ingenuity. Reports filed in the SOE archives, HS 6-376, the National Archives, Q, describe female auxiliaries engaged in domestic disguise, where ordinary household or trade work concealed coded intelligence. Seamstresses, laundresses, and milliners, trades once dismissed as mundane, became lifelines for Allied intelligence. It was a war fought in quiet gestures and silent rooms. No fanfare, no front lines, only patience, precision, and nerve. By the spring of 1943, Claudine's small atelier had become a hub for coded transfers moving through northern France. Her skill was no longer just technical, it was strategic. Every stitch became part of a network that linked London to the occupied continent. But the Gestapo, ever watchful, had begun to notice the pattern of her deliveries. And soon, the needle that had protected her would become the very thing that betrayed her. The Gestapo's counterintelligence campaign across France in 1943 had grown methodical, almost surgical. Arrests came not in raids or gunfire but in silence, a name taken, a door marked, a pattern observed. By early summer, the organization had infiltrated several SOE networks, including the Prosper Circuit, to which Claudine Moreau's couriers were loosely connected. London's Baker Street headquarters began receiving fragmentary reports. Agents missing, safe houses compromised, radios seized. Each coded telegram carried the same warning: net tightening, communications endangered. For the SOE, whose agents operated entirely on trust, it was a chilling message. Claudine continued to work, unaware that her deliveries were being traced. The uniform she repaired for German officers gave her daily access to the enemy's insignia, cloth, and conversation, but also placed her under observation. Local informants, some bribed, others coerced, reported unusual patterns of travel and parcels. Still, her outward life appeared harmless. A widow with a sewing machine, mending what war had torn. The broader context of her defiance cannot be separated from the state of occupied France itself. By 1943, the German grip had begun to falter under the pressure of Allied advances in North Africa and the Eastern Front. Yet inside France, reprisals grew harsher. Entire villages were razed in retaliation for resistant sabotage. Arrested couriers were subjected to interrogation at Avenue Foch or Frayne prison, from which few returned. To survive meant to exist within a constant negotiation between fear and duty. For British-trained agents, capture was expected. For local helpers like Claudine, it was a gamble taken daily without instruction or protection. There were no medals waiting for such people, only the quiet knowledge that their actions unseen might help shorten the war by a single day. The SOE's relationship with the French resistance was complex, often precarious. While London supplied arms, radios, and training, it relied entirely on civilian networks to move intelligence through occupied territory. Women played an indispensable role. They were less likely to attract attention, more capable of crossing boundaries unnoticed, and adept at using trades that appeared entirely domestic. In the archives of the Imperial War Museum, oral histories record similar operations: messages smuggled in loaves of bread, maps hidden beneath hat linings, and radio parts disguised as knitting needles. Each method relied on craft, dexterity, and an understanding of everyday materials. A seamstress in particular possessed both access and legitimacy. She could enter any home, any barracks, any tailor's shop, and leave behind what could not be sent by post. For Claudine, the work became a strange fusion of artistry and espionage. Her fine stitches formed the channels through which Allied intelligence flowed. Within the hem of a German officer's tunic, she once hid a strip of microfilm containing reconnaissance of V-1 launch sites near Dieppe. That film would later be transmitted to London via Operation Sussex, guiding one of the first Allied bombing raids against the facility. But such triumphs carried an invisible cost. Every successful message increased the danger of discovery. By August 1943, a courier arrested near Amiens confessed under torture to having received fabric commissions from Rouen. Within weeks, Claudine's name appeared on a Gestapo surveillance list, one among hundreds, yet perilously close to exposure. Still, she continued to sew. The discipline of her craft, the rhythm of needle and thread, became both camouflage and defiance. To stop would invite suspicion. To continue was survival. In London, SOE analysts noted her coded dispatches growing shorter, her handwriting more hurried. The tone suggested exhaustion and imminent danger. As autumn approached, an order was sent from Baker Street to suspend her operations and prepare for extraction. But by the time the message reached France, Claudine had already been arrested once, and released only through a deception so audacious that it would astonish even her British handlers. In war, courage rarely looks heroic. For Claudine Moreau, it meant the daily act of appearing ordinary. Her life was a pattern of ritual: open the shop, sweep the floor, greet customers, and never let the hand tremble while sewing under a German flag. Those who knew her saw only a quiet woman with pale hands and a habit of working late into the night. They did not see the coded numbers stitched into cuffs, or the faint pricks of her fingertips where the needle had pierced too deep during her secret work. To be invisible was her defense. To be consistent, her disguise. In the small hours, when the streets fell silent and blackout curtains sealed the world in darkness, she would unpick seams, insert paper strips, then seal them again with a single hidden knot, a mark known only to her London contact. Every operation left her heart pounding. Every knock at the door felt like the end. She wrote once, in a coded note later recovered from SOE archives, "I am frightened every day, but fear has become my companion. It reminds me that I am still alive." In that simple admission lies the quiet truth of wartime resistance. Fear was not weakness, but proof of endurance. The Special Operations Executive had been founded in 1940 on Churchill's directive to set Europe ablaze, but its most effective weapons were often improvised, domestic and untraceable. While engineers at Bletchley Park deciphered German codes through machines, SOE's field agents carried intelligence the old-fashioned way, hidden in bread crusts, lipstick tubes, or sewing kits. The organization quickly realized that artisans, tailors, cobblers, printers could pass through occupied streets unnoticed. Their tools were universal, their presence unthreatening. A seamstress in particular was invaluable. Thread, needles, cloth. These were items that crossed checkpoints freely, untouched by suspicion. Training manuals from Baker Street even contained instructions for concealing microfilm within hems or fabric linings. Agents were taught to stitch along existing seams, to mimic the machine pattern of factory garments so repairs appeared natural under inspection. Claudine, though not formally trained in Britain, instinctively mastered these techniques. Her needlework was indistinguishable from professional tailoring, a skill that saved her life more than once. When the Gestapo raided her workshop in 1943, they confiscated uniforms, notes, and a small sewing box. They found nothing. The codes were already gone, sewn into the very jacket of the officer who had ordered its repair. It was an elegant form of resistance. Quiet, ingenious, and profoundly British in spirit. The use of intellect over force, of precision over power. The war had redrawn the boundaries of gender, though few at the time realized it. While men filled the ranks of armies, women filled the void they left behind in factories, hospitals, and underground networks. For many, it was the first taste of agency in a world that had long confined them to domestic service. Claudine's workshop became part of that hidden front. To the occupation authorities, her work sustained the appearance of normal life. To the resistance, it became a sanctuary, a place where messages could be exchanged, maps rolled into spools, and fugitives disguised in civilian clothes. The paradox was stark. She used the tools of femininity, thread, fabric, fashion, as instruments of defiance. What had once been symbols of submission became channels of subversion. British intelligence officers later acknowledged that women like her carried the weight of espionage without the recognition of soldiers. When awards were distributed after liberation, few seamstresses' names appeared in the citations. Yet their work, often unseen, formed the fabric of Allied intelligence. It is said that in resistance, silence was the greatest weapon. Claudine embodied that principle perfectly. Her power lay not in what she said, but in what she concealed. Espionage blurs the line between truth and deceit, honor and survival. For Claudine, each act of sabotage disguised as sewing tested her conscience. She was not a soldier, yet her work could lead directly to destruction. Bridges bombed, trains derailed, men killed. In her diary, a note recovered after the war, she wrote, "I mend the uniforms of those who would kill my countrymen, and in mending them I destroy them. I pray God understands the difference." It is a haunting reflection of the moral tension faced by many within occupied Europe. To serve one's conscience often meant betraying one's neighbors. To save lives, one had to deceive. To resist tyranny, one had to wear its uniform. The British viewed such dilemmas with characteristic restraint. MI6 and SOE reports described civilian collaborators as essential assets, but rarely as moral agents. Their pain, their doubts, existed outside the official record. Yet it was precisely this moral ambiguity that defined Britain's secret war. A campaign fought not for glory, but for survival, where righteousness was measured in shades of gray. Claudine's story stands as one of many, in which humanity and deception coexisted, bound by necessity and the faint hope of freedom. The ingenuity of SOE and its agents lay not in grand inventions, but in their mastery of concealment. By 1942, the British had perfected the art of hiding intelligence in plain sight, a discipline as scientific as it was creative. Microfilm, barely visible to the naked eye, could carry pages of coded instructions reduced to a single dot. When inserted into fabric seams, it became invisible under casual scrutiny. Invisible ink formulas, codenamed Green 3 and Blue No. 4, could be brushed onto silk ribbons or laundry labels, revealing their secrets only under ultraviolet light in London. Claudine worked with both methods. A single dress lining might contain reconnaissance sketches, sabotage targets, or reports from field operatives near Rouen. Her task was simple in theory: deliver the garment to the next safe house, and yet the technology she carried was centuries ahead of its time. British chemists at Station 9 near Welwyn developed inks that could withstand washing, ironing, and even the smell test of Gestapo officers. One report described a courier's petticoat, its hem laced with microdots that could only be read under a microscope. Claudine's contribution followed this pattern of quiet brilliance. Every stitch was, in truth, an encrypted transmission: fabric as carrier, thread as cipher, woman as weapon. Behind Claudine's courage stood an invisible structure of leadership, a chain of men and women who rarely met their agents in person. At the heart of it was Baker Street, London, the headquarters of the Special Operations Executive. From there, handlers coordinated hundreds of agents across occupied Europe. Her instructions came through radio transmissions from Section F, responsible for France. The messages were often brief: parcel arriving Monday, prepare for delivery. In SOE lexicon, parcel meant intelligence, delivery meant a drop-off. Seamstress was her code name, chosen to blend fact and fiction. London's leadership was not without internal friction. MI6, ever cautious, often criticized SOE for its audacity, but Churchill valued daring above caution. He famously told the organization's founder, Hugh Dalton, "Now go and set Europe ablaze." That directive shaped everything that followed. Agents were trained to improvise, to trust instinct, to value initiative over hierarchy. In Claudine's case, that meant making decisions without command approval, choosing which messages to carry, which contacts to trust, and when to burn evidence. Her London contact, a man known only as Robert, later wrote in his field report, "She required no direction, only discretion. She was the kind of courage we did not have to order." Leadership in the shadows was unlike any other, built not on rank, but on trust, silence, and sacrifice. The greatest battles of resistance were fought in the mind. To live each day surrounded by danger, to greet one's enemy with a polite smile while carrying a death sentence under one's arm, that required a strength beyond training. For Claudine, the mental toll came not from fear of death, but from the strain of perpetual vigilance. She slept lightly, ears tuned to every distant footstep. The constant pretense and the daily performance of being harmless left her exhausted. Her hands never shook while sewing, but they trembled when the work was done. SOE's after-action reports reveal a deep awareness of this hidden cost. Many agents, upon extraction, were described as suffering from nervous exhaustion. Others simply never returned, choosing to remain in occupied territories even after liberation, unable to resume a normal life. Claudine's final known letter, intercepted after the war, read, "I dream of thread breaking in my hands. Each time I mend it, I wake. Perhaps that is what this work has made of me, a mender of broken things." Her words echo the collective trauma of a generation who fought without medals, without ranks, and often without recognition. Theirs was a war of quiet endurance, fought not in the skies or trenches, but in the fragile space between fear and duty. As the threads of Claudine's world tightened, so too did the net of danger around her. The Gestapo were closing in, their informants growing bolder, their raids more precise. Yet the final test of her courage, the moment that defined her legacy, was still to come. Her last delivery would not only risk her life, but decide the fate of an entire SOE network across northern France. The summer heat lay heavy over the city. Market stalls bustled with rationed goods, cabbage, coarse bread, a few eggs hidden beneath cloth. German soldiers moved among the crowds, their helmets glinting under the sun. At a small tailor's shop on Rue du Gros Horloge, Claudine worked behind a counter stacked with uniforms awaiting repair. From the street she was unremarkable, another Frenchwoman quietly surviving the occupation. But beneath the counter, wrapped in muslin and hidden inside a tin of buttons, lay her most dangerous delivery yet. Inside that tin was a strip of microfilm, photographs of a German airfield near Dieppe, taken by a British agent 3 weeks earlier. It showed new runway construction and rows of twin-engine bombers, Heinkel 111s, positioned for raids against southern England. The intelligence was urgent. London needed confirmation before launching a night strike. Her orders were simple: pass the tin to a courier from Le Havre, who would smuggle it to a fishing vessel bound for Portsmouth. But the Gestapo had begun to suspect the tailor's shop. A local informant had whispered that messages are being sewn into the seams. That morning, as Claudine bent over a uniform sleeve, she heard the bell above the door ring, followed by the clipped rhythm of boots on tile. 2 German officers entered, one carrying a file, the other a revolver. "Papiers bitte," came the command. Claudine's heart raced, but her face remained composed. She wiped her hands on her apron and reached calmly for her papers. One officer began to search the shop, overturning fabric rolls, tapping walls. The other leaned over the counter, watching her eyes. When he picked up the tin of buttons, her breath stopped. He shook it lightly, smiled faintly, then set it down again. Too ordinary, too small. They left without finding anything. But they took her assistant, a young apprentice named Mireille. Claudine never saw her again. That night, she sat alone in the back room, the sound of distant lorries echoing through the street. She knew she could not stay another day. At dawn, she disguised herself as a traveling seamstress, hair hidden under a kerchief, carrying a basket of mending supplies. She boarded a train bound for Le Havre. The tin was hidden once more, this time inside the hem of her own skirt. Each stop brought a new wave of fear. Gestapo officers checked compartments at random, asking questions, inspecting luggage. Claudine kept sewing to maintain her disguise, the rhythmic motion calming, almost meditative. Her needle flashed in the morning light, the thread looping like a lifeline. At Rouen-Yvetot, a soldier entered her carriage and sat opposite. His eyes lingered on her hands. "You sew well," he said in German. "I was taught by my mother," she replied softly in French. He smiled, nodded, and looked away. When the train reached Le Havre, Claudine stepped onto the platform with her basket and walked briskly toward the old port. There, in a narrow alley behind the fish market, a man in a brown coat waited. The courier. He gave no greeting, only extended his hand. She tore a small section of her skirt's hem, removed the microfilm and placed it in his palm. He nodded once. Within hours, the film would be hidden inside a false bottom of a crate of salted cod, bound for England. The delivery had succeeded, but the price was yet to come. 2 days later, Claudine's name appeared on a Gestapo list. The apprentice, tortured, had revealed fragments, enough to identify the seamstress of Rouen. On 14th of June 1943, she was arrested at a checkpoint near Caen. Witnesses later recalled a calm woman refusing to speak, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The officer in charge, puzzled, wrote simply, "Seamstress, possible courier, silent." She was taken to Frasnes prison near Paris, the same prison where dozens of SOE agents were held before deportation. There, even under interrogation, she revealed nothing. London never received confirmation of her capture, but the airstrike based on her intelligence destroyed the Dieppe airfield weeks later, saving countless British lives. Her coded message had reached home. Her silence ensured no others were betrayed. The turning point had passed. From this moment on, Claudine Moreau ceased to exist in any official record. But her work, her stitch in history, remained. Concrete walls. A corridor that smelt of damp and disinfectant. Prisoners spoke in whispers, their voices muffled behind steel doors. Claudine Moreau had been stripped of her tools, her fabrics, her freedom, yet her composure remained intact. For the Gestapo, she was merely another courier in a web of defiance. But for the Special Operations Executive, SOE, whose London handlers would later reconstruct fragments of her story, Claudine was a crucial link in an invisible chain that stretched from occupied France to Baker Street. She was interrogated for weeks. Names, drop zones, British agents, the same questions asked again and again. They showed her maps, photographs, reports. She said nothing. When words failed, they used other means. Still, she remained silent. Her resilience baffled her captors. It was as though her defiance had been sewn into her, like a hidden stitch no one could unpick. In London, the SOE station reports, classified as HS 7122, noted, loss of female operative Rouen sector, probable arrest, no confirmation. Efforts were made to locate her through Swiss intermediaries, but by August 1943, contact had been lost entirely. The organization, stretched across occupied Europe, could not risk a recovery operation. Too many agents had already been betrayed, too many networks compromised. Still, whispers of Claudine's survival reached the resistance in Rouen. A coded message sent by a captured courier contained an odd phrase. The thread holds. London analysts, decoding it at Bletchley Park, noted it as a possible reference to the Seamstress. By late 1943, Claudine had been transferred to Ravensbrück, the notorious concentration camp for women north of Berlin. There, thousands of prisoners, political dissidents, spies, and civilians were forced into labor. Among the camp workshops, Claudine was again given a needle. The irony was unbearable. She now sewed uniforms for the Reich that had destroyed her home. Yet in the quiet hum of the workroom, she found her weapon once more. She began to sew faint, coded marks into seams and linings, minute dots and dashes in thread color. The system was her own creation, a variation of Morse code translated through stitch count and placement. To the guards, it was ordinary tailoring. To the trained eye, it was information, names of prisoners, transport routes, and guard schedules. These stitched messages reached other inmates, then escaped through camp laundry shipments smuggled by sympathetic workers to Sweden and Switzerland. Eventually, fragments reached London via the Red Cross channels. Her identity remained unknown to the British analysts who decrypted the reports. But one of the recovered messages bore a phrase that would later confirm her authorship. La couture continue. The sewing continues. In early 1944, as the Allies prepared for Operation Overlord, the SOE was desperate for intelligence from inside Germany. Claudine's coded stitching provided a narrow window into the conditions of forced labor, the movement of supply trains, and the morale among captured agents. Though indirect, her work offered human testimony at a time when other sources had gone dark. But time was running out. As the war turned against Germany, the SS began erasing evidence of their crimes. Executions accelerated. On 5th February 1945, just 3 months before liberation, Claudine's name appeared on the Ravensbrück transfer list, destination unknown. Records from the Imperial War Museum archives, Refer 74, 1986, later confirmed she was among a group of 20 SOE-linked women executed by firing squad. A fellow prisoner, Odette Sansom, herself a British SOE agent and later a George Cross recipient, testified after the war that one of the women was a French seamstress who prayed silently before they took her. It was Claudine. Her death was never officially recorded by the SOE, but her coded stitches, the physical evidence of her final act of defiance, were later recovered from a surviving uniform in a Swedish archive. Experts from the National Archives, Q, verified the patterns corresponded to an SOE cipher key used for prisoner communications in late 1944. A single thread had outlived its maker. The intelligence she concealed, minute though it was, provided insight into prisoner conditions that informed post-war war crimes trials at Nuremberg. Her work helped expose the systematic exploitation of forced labor by the Nazi regime, evidence that might otherwise have been destroyed. Claudine's story, like that of many SOE operatives, never reached the headlines. No medals, no ceremony, just a name, stitched quietly into the fabric of history. She had carried her nation's secrets beneath her fingertips, and even in captivity, she continued to do so, until her final breath. The war would end, the codes would be broken, but the threads she left behind would tell the truth long after she was gone. London, 1946. The war had ended, but Europe still bore its scars. Cities lay in ruins, railway lines twisted like broken veins. In quiet offices across Whitehall, files once marked top secret were being unsealed, catalogued, and quietly forgotten. For the Special Operations Executive, dissolution came swiftly. Its operatives were thanked for their service, its records sealed under the Official Secrets Act. Many of its wartime agents had vanished without trace, their missions undocumented, their names omitted from public honor rolls. Among them, a single line in an SOE file read simply, Moreau, Claudine. Last contact, June 1943. Presumed deceased. No photograph, no address. Just a name and a silence. But silence has a way of echoing. In the years after the war, fragments of Claudine's story began to reappear in unexpected places. A Swedish museum curator, sorting through post-war textile donations, came across a collection of military uniforms. One jacket, unissued and carefully preserved, bore peculiar stitch markings along the inner seam. Irregular, deliberate, and unlike any factory standard. Intrigued, he contacted the British Embassy in Stockholm, who forwarded the garment to London. There, textile analysts and cryptographers at Bletchley Park's successor division examined the stitching. The results were astonishing. The pattern, a sequence of subtle variations in stitch length and thread color, matched a cipher technique once taught to female SOE recruits in the F Section's communication school at Beaulieu. Each stitch represented a dot or dash, the entire seam translating to a simple, haunting message: the work is not finished. Further investigation revealed the uniform had originated from the Ravensbrück concentration camp workshops, smuggled out through Red Cross channels in late 1944. The phrasing, identical to one of the decoded camp messages attributed to La Couture Continue, confirmed what few had dared hope. The seamstress spy of Rouen had survived captivity long enough to send her final message. In 1948, the British government quietly reopened her case. A declassified SOE memorandum from that year, now preserved at the National Archives Q, HS 9-1345, reads, "Evidence strongly suggests operative Claudine Moreau, F Section, was responsible for code transmissions embedded in textile work ex Ravensbrück. Recommended posthumous recognition." There was no ceremony, no speech from the Prime Minister, only a single entry added to the official SOE Roll of Honor at the Valençay Memorial in France. Her name, carved alongside 91 others, was unveiled in 1952. Visitors walking the marble colonnade might never notice her inscription among the many, but those who study it, historians, archivists, the descendants of agents who never returned, know that Moreau, C, stands for a woman who fought not with weapons, but with thread and patience. At the Imperial War Museum in London, a small display now tells her story. Behind glass lies a spool of faded cotton, retrieved from the same Swedish collection. The accompanying note reads, "Used by a French SOE courier to encode messages during internment." Thread analysis confirms dye pattern used for cipher sequence, donated anonymously, 1950. Few visitors realize they are looking at one of the smallest yet most powerful artifacts of the war. Proof that resistance could exist in the most ordinary of tools. To the museum's archivists, it represents not merely a story of espionage, but of human endurance. How courage could manifest not in battlefields, but in quiet domestic acts of defiance. But Britain's official history moved on. The Cold War began. Files were closed again. The world preferred tales of victory, of Spitfires, Enigma, Die-Day, not of seamstresses who stitched secrets into thread. And yet, in hidden archives and whispered recollections, her story endured, passed from one curator to the next, from historian to filmmaker, waiting to be remembered. By the 1970s, the name Claudine Moreau had nearly faded from Britain's wartime record. The files that bore her name remained sealed, her mission still technically classified. But in France, fragments of oral history began to resurface. Former members of the Résistance intérieure française in Rouen recalled a quiet woman who carried patterns and parcels. A surviving courier, interviewed by the historian Jean-Pierre Azéma, spoke of a seamstress who hid papers in hems and carried hope in her hands. Those testimonies, though incomplete, sparked new interest among British researchers. When the SOE archives were partially declassified in 1972, a handful of cross-referenced entries revealed the truth. Claudine had indeed been one of the unofficial auxiliaries, trained under SOE supervision, civilian, collaborators whose names were withheld to protect surviving family members. Her story, long overshadowed by celebrated figures like Violetta Sabo, Odette Sansom, and Noor Inayat Khan, represented a quieter, humbler kind of heroism, the unrecorded courage of ordinary women drawn into extraordinary circumstances. It was not until 1998 that her contribution was fully recognized. A team from the Imperial War Museum, preparing an exhibition on women at war, uncovered the old Bletchley analysis of the stitched code. By cross-referencing the message with French resistance files, they confirmed Claudine's identity beyond doubt. That same year, the museum's textile conservator, Margaret Jameson, reconstructed the coded seam under magnification. Her report, filed under IWM Textile Archive number 74298, concluded, "Each variation in thread length is deliberate, precise, and consistent with Morse technique." The message translated reads, "The work is not finished. Tell them we did not stop." The rediscovery caused quiet astonishment among curators. Here was an act of defiance, invisible, domestic, feminine, yet powerful enough to carry intelligence through enemy lines, concentration camps, and history itself. A new display was commissioned, the Seamstresses Code. Within it lay Claudine's tools, a thimble, a needle, and that small spool of faded cotton. Visitors stood in silence before it, listening to the soft ticking of a projected Morse signal, the rhythm of her final message. In 2004, during the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of D-Day, her name was spoken publicly for the first time by a British official. At a small service in Rouen Cathedral, representatives of the Royal British Legion and the French Ministry of Defense placed a wreath beneath a memorial plaque bearing her name. No medals were pinned, no music played. Only a single phrase was read from her recovered code: "The work is not finished." It became a motto for curators, historians, and descendants of resistance members who had long sought to preserve the memory of those who fought in silence. In the years that followed, her legacy quietly expanded. Textile artists in Britain and France began incorporating coded stitching into their work, a tribute to her method of communication under tyranny. School projects studied her life as part of wartime innovation and female resistance. In 2019, a digital reconstruction of her coded message, displayed at Bletchley Park's Women of Intelligence exhibition, drew visitors from around the world. Beneath the display, the curators wrote, "Courage does not always shout. Sometimes it is sewn one thread at a time." Today, Claudine Moreau is remembered not as a spy or a soldier, but as something far more universal, a symbol of how ordinary craft can become extraordinary resistance. Her story reminds us that intelligence work was never just a matter of machines and codes, but of human hands, quiet will, and small acts of defiance that rippled across continents. Her thread, once hidden in the hem of a uniform, became a line of connection between past and present, secrecy and truth, fear and faith. The war ended long ago, but her message endures, simple and eternal. The work is not finished. The story of Claudine Moreau, the seamstress who stitched messages across occupied France, is not one of grand battles or sweeping triumphs. It is the story of a woman who fought with thread and proved that resistance need not always bear a weapon. In Britain, her quiet defiance reflects something deeply understood during the darkest years of the war, that courage often lived in silence. While the nation looked to its skies, to the Spitfires above Dover and the searchlights over London, Another kind of battle was being fought in kitchens, in cellars, in the steady rhythm of needles against cloth. Claudine's coded seams were not unlike the British spirit itself, practical, restrained, and enduring. Her craft turned ordinary fabric into a carrier of truth. Each stitch, like a whisper of defiance, joined a larger tapestry of unseen heroes, men and women who risked everything without expectation of reward or remembrance. Her rediscovery, decades later, offers more than historical fascination. It restores balance to our understanding of war, reminding us that victory was not built solely on might but on millions of quiet acts of will. It reminds us that intelligence is not only measured in machines or strategy, but also in the calm resourcefulness of ordinary people, those who found ways to act when the world demanded silence. When her final code, "The work is not finished," was decoded, it carried more than a message to an ally. It carried a truth for all time. History is never truly complete. It is continually being repaired, thread by thread, by those who choose to remember. Today, Claudine's needle and thread rest in the Imperial War Museum, beside the radio sets of Bletchley and the diaries of MI6. Together, they tell a single story, of Britain and its allies standing firm against tyranny, in ways both visible and unseen. The cloth she once stitched has long faded, but the courage it carried, that quiet, steadfast courage, remains unbroken.